You are not exhausted because life is hard. You're exhausted because a part of you still believes wanting more money makes you morally contaminated. You call it being humble, patient, realistic, grounded. But beneath those clean words, there is often a quieter confession. You are terrified of becoming visible. You say you do not care about wealth, yet your body tightens every time someone your age buys freedom, speaks boldly, or stops apologizing for ambition. That reaction is not wisdom, and it is not maturity. It is often wounded pride dressing itself in virtue so it can avoid the risk of action. Many people do not fail because they are lazy. They fail because guilt has poisoned desire long before discipline ever had a chance. They were taught to admire sacrifice so deeply that struggle started feeling holy. Thus, while success started feeling suspicious, corrupt, selfish, or somehow spiritually dirty. So they build an identity around enduring less, wanting less, needing less, and then they call that emotional depth instead of underdeveloped power. The tragedy is not just financial. The tragedy is that they begin worshiping limitation because limitation protects them from judgment, envy, and public failure. A broke identity can become a moral costume, and once that costume feels righteous, poverty stops looking like a problem and starts looking like proof. Proof that you are pure, proof that you are not greedy, proof that you are not one of those hungry people who dare to compete. But life does not reward you for making weakness look noble. Life responds to clarity, force, competence, value, endurance, and the courage to enter the arena. Nietzsche saw this mechanism long before social media, long before hustle culture, long before modern therapy language gave people softer names for old evasions. He called it slave morality, the moment weakness stops admitting its weakness and starts declaring itself morally superior to strength, appetite, and worldly achievement. In simple language, it means people who fear power often redefine power as evil, so they never have to confront their own fear. That is why some people secretly resent money while desperately needing it, because their survival depends on wealth, but their identity depends on rejecting it. So they split in two directions at once. One part wants security, options, dignity, and influence, while the other part condemns desire itself. When your inner world is divided like that, motivation collapses. Not because you lack dreams, but because every dream triggers an inner trial. You want to build, but another voice calls it arrogance. You want to earn, but another voice whispers that decency means staying small. You want recognition, but another voice says attention is vanity. You want authority, but another voice says leadership makes you dangerous or selfish. And then you wonder why you procrastinate, why you sabotage opportunities, why your energy disappears exactly when real movement becomes possible. It is not random. Your nervous system is defending an old moral image of yourself, even while your adult life suffocates underneath it. This is why so many intelligent people stay stuck in underpaid lives while telling themselves they are simply waiting for the right moment. Thus, the right moment rarely arrives for someone who still believes expansion is betrayal, because every open door feels like a test of innocence. You hesitate, delay, overthink, research endlessly, polish your intentions, and present your passivity as caution, while time quietly converts fear into fate. Then comes the most dangerous part. You start romanticizing your pain because pain feels cleaner than ambition and safer than visible failure. You tell yourself that hardship made you deep, that being overlooked made you wise, that being broke kept you authentic and morally uncorrupted. Maybe some pain did deepen you, but pain can also become an altar where you keep sacrificing your future to preserve an old self-image. Not every struggle is meaningful, and not every sacrifice is noble. Yet some sacrifices are simply fear-wearing ceremonial robes. A person can stay poor for years, not because the world is fair, but because their guilt makes every move toward power feel like sin. That guilt does not always sound religious or dramatic. Sometimes it sounds like being humble, staying grateful, not asking for too much, not changing too fast. But humility without agency becomes self-erasure. Gratitude without ambition becomes sedation, and patience without direction becomes a beautifully worded form of surrender. And surrender feels peaceful for a while because it removes the burden of becoming someone your old environment might not understand. That matters more than most people admit, because success is rarely just about money. It is about separation, and separation terrifies the tribal mind. To rise economically, often means outgrowing the emotional rules of your family, your friends, your culture, your class, and your old identity. It means tolerating being misunderstood by people who preferred you harmless, available, agreeable, and permanently one step below your real potential. So many people remain loyal to the emotional comfort of belonging, even when that belonging quietly demands they betray their future. They do not say, "I choose poverty." They say, "I do not want to become that kind of person." But hidden inside that sentence is a terrifying assumption that wealth automatically corrupts and that innocence requires powerlessness. That belief is convenient because it saves you from testing yourself, from discovering whether you could become powerful without becoming cruel. Nietzsche would say this moral posture often emerges from resentment. When people cannot access strength, they rebrand strength as filth and call themselves superior. That sounds harsh, until you watch how often contempt appears right beside envy whenever money, status, beauty, or influence enters the room. People sneer at ambition while secretly aching for the freedom ambition could have bought them had they respected their own appetite sooner. So they attack the game instead of admitting they are afraid to play it, and that honesty would be far more dignified. This is where Carl Jung becomes essential, because Jung understood that whatever you refuse to own in yourself does not disappear. It goes underground, it becomes shadow, and from the shadow it begins controlling your choices, moods, fantasies, resentments, and private humiliations. If you reject your hunger for power, your hunger does not die. It mutates into bitterness, passive aggression, envy, moral superiority, and chronic self-sabotage. If you reject your aggression, you do not become kind. You become weak in public and hostile in secret. If you reject your ambition, you do not become peaceful. You become numb, fatigued, delayed, and quietly resentful toward anyone who dares to act. Jung warned that the shadow is dangerous, not because it exists, but because the unconscious part of us always seeks expression. What you will not use consciously, life will express unconsciously through sabotage, addiction, paralysis, projection, jealousy, and repeated attraction to humiliating circumstances. So when you say, "I'm just not that driven," it may be completely false. Maybe your drive is buried under moral shame. Maybe your ambition was punished early, mocked, spiritualized away, or associated with arrogance, selfishness, betrayal, or becoming unlovable. Maybe you learned that being chosen required softness, compliance, and emotional convenience, not intensity, appetite, or force. So you amputated the part of yourself that wanted more, and then you called the wound your personality. That is why some people look calm on the surface while rotting with frustration underneath, because disowned power does not create peace, it creates decay. You can hear it in the quiet sentence many people never say aloud, "If I really went all in, people would judge me." Yes, they might, because a person moving toward power disturbs everyone who built comfort around your hesitation. The obedient version of you made other people feel safe, predictable, and morally taller than they really were. The ambitious version of you forces comparison, awakens insecurity, breaks old roles, and exposes who benefited from your self-minimization. That is why guilt often spikes precisely when your life is about to expand, because expansion threatens every system built around your smaller self. You think your problem is laziness, but laziness is often frozen aggression, energy with nowhere honorable to go. Aggression here does not mean cruelty, rage, or domination. It means the ability to move against resistance in service of a chosen aim. It means saying no without collapsing, charging a price without apology, asking directly, negotiating firmly, leaving dead spaces, and tolerating disapproval. Without that energy, you cannot protect your time, increase your income, build leverage, or survive the friction that growth naturally requires. A sheep can be innocent, but a sheep cannot hold territory, cannot command value, and cannot defend a future. Many people try to succeed while remaining psychologically harmless, and that contradiction eventually starves them of force. Because the market does not reward internal purity fantasies, it rewards usefulness, courage, repetition, skill, positioning, and the capacity to bear tension. If tension makes you feel immoral, then every serious goal will feel spiritually dangerous long before it becomes materially possible. That is why guilt is such an effective poverty mechanism. It turns action into inner conflict and turns hesitation into moral relief. Every time you delay, a hidden part of you feels safer, feel cleaner, and temporarily absolved from the threat of becoming powerful. But that relief has a price, and the price is years of under-earning, over-explaining, and watching your potential harden into regret. Regret is not just sadness about missed money. Regret is the grief of meeting the self you could have become too late. And the cruelest thing is that the world often praises your restraint while your actual life quietly shrinks around it. People love the version of you that never competes, never intimidates, never outgrows the script, and never demands the full price of your value. They call you grounded, humble, sweet, easygoing, modest, and refreshingly different from all those hungry people chasing more. Sometimes that praise is not love. Sometimes it is social anesthesia. It's a reward for staying economically non-threatening and psychologically easy to manage. You need the courage to ask a brutal question. Who benefits from me believing that wanting more is morally suspect? Because every belief survives somewhere, and many beautiful beliefs survive because they keep someone else comfortable while keeping you weak. This is why the delusion must be shattered at the root, not with generic motivation, but with a new moral orientation. Money is not proof of virtue, and poverty is not proof of depth. Both are conditions, and neither automatically reveals the quality of your soul. A cruel rich man exists, yes, but so does the bitter poor man who weaponizes virtue because he never built competence. The question is not whether wealth is pure. The question is whether your relationship to power is conscious, disciplined and integrated. That is where Jung's idea of shadow integration becomes liberation instead of theory, because integration means you stop pretending your darker energies do not exist. You admit that you want influence, comfort, authority, beauty, freedom, and the right to shape your own days. You admit that competition excites you, that recognition matters, that winning feels alive, and that none of this automatically makes you monstrous. Then something important happens. Your energy returns, because you are no longer spending half your life prosecuting your own desire. The person who is always tired is not always overworked. Sometimes they are exhausted from suppressing the force that could have moved their life forward. Suppression looks civilized, but internally it is expensive. Because every disowned impulse must be monitored, denied, softened, or translated into acceptable language. That constant self-policing drains initiative, dulls instincts, and leaves you trapped in endless preparation without impact. Once you integrate aggression, desire, and the will to expand, your decisions become cleaner, not harsher, because you stop lying to yourself. You stop calling cowardice peace, you stop calling envy discernment, and you stop calling inaction humility. You begin to understand that self-mastery is not killing desire. It is directing desire so it serves structure instead of chaos. That is the real reversal, because many people think discipline means suppressing appetite, when mature discipline actually means harnessing appetite. The fire was never the enemy. Your fear of being seen using fire was the enemy. A person integrated with shadow can earn hard without worshiping money, lead strongly without becoming abusive, and build power without abandoning conscience. That is maturity, not moral castration, the union of force and awareness, appetite and restraint, ambition and responsibility. And once you taste that union, the old fantasy of noble helplessness starts to feel insulting. Because there is nothing spiritually superior about avoiding your gifts, shrinking your reach, and forcing your future to pay for your innocence performance. The world does not need more guilty people pretending limitation is wisdom. It needs people strong enough to handle power consciously. That begins with one terrifying permission. You're allowed to want more without writing a moral essay to justify it. Yes, you're allowed to charge more, build more, protect more, own more, and become more difficult to control. You're allowed to leave environments that celebrate your goodness only when your goodness keeps you economically dependent. You're allowed to become competent enough that your old excuses can no longer survive in your presence. This does not mean despising the poor, worshiping status, or becoming ruthless for applause. It means ending your romance with self-diminishment. It means seeing money as stored choice, stored time, stored protection, stored mobility, and stored distance from people who exploit necessity. When you earn more ethically, you buy room to think, room to recover, room to say no, and room to choose better relationships. That is why money, handled consciously, is not greed at its highest form. As it is self-command at its most practical level. A person with no internal permission for power will sabotage income, because income represents the very autonomy they still unconsciously fear. So the work is not merely financial, it is moral, psychological, symbolic, and deeply personal. You're not just trying to make more money, you're trying to become someone who no longer confuses suffering with goodness. Someone who can feel hunger without shame, competition without collapse, ambition without self-hatred, and success without the need to self-punish afterward. Someone who can tolerate being envied, misread, criticized, or called changed, because growth always sounds offensive to people invested in your old proportions. You do not need to become colder, only clearer, not crueler, only less available for your own self-betrayal. So watch your language from now on. Because language reveals loyalty, and loyalty reveals the hidden God you actually serve. If you keep glorifying patience while avoiding risk, praising simplicity while fearing expansion, and worshiping struggle while refusing strategy, your words are confessing. They are confessing that guilt still sits on the throne where your agency should be. Remove it, and many things become simpler. Decisions sharpen, prices rise, boundaries hold, and action stops feeling like a moral emergency. You begin to respect your own force instead of treating it like contraband hidden under the floorboards of your personality. And that respect changes posture, voice, timing, relationship, standards, and the quality of opportunities that begin finding you. Now, it's because the world often mirrors the level of seriousness with which you inhabit your own value. So no, your guilt is not making you pure. It may be making you poor, hesitant, underpaid, and secretly resentful. And no, your struggle is not always noble. Sometimes it is the tax you keep paying to protect a frightened, outdated identity. Break that identity, and money becomes less mystical, because earning starts to feel like trained force expressed through consistent reality-based action. That is the shift from victimhood to will, from moral performance to integration, from romantic suffering to adult authorship. You do not need permission from the crowd to reclaim your appetite, your aggression, your standards, and your right to build a stronger life. Ahmed, you only need the honesty to admit that the self who stays small is not always good. Often, it is simply afraid. So stop kneeling before a version of virtue that demands your silence, your fatigue, your dependency, and the burial of your best capacities. Stand up, integrate the shadow, train the hunger, master the force, and let your money become evidence that you finally stop betraying yourself. Take care of your mind, protect your inner authority, stay healthy, and subscribe if you want more videos that sharpen your power without poisoning your soul.